Joe, I'm so excited to speak with you about your film work and this awesome rendition of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, now known as Jekyll and Hyde. What inspired you? What drew you to this project originally? Because it's what, like an 1886 novel? I don't think it usually is like a wow, I can't wait to jump into this one.
Yeah. I guess so I mean the setup of this project was quite strange in that ultimately I kind of it was during COVID and we were basically kind of just developing a few different things. And there were this project where we were kind of going, I want something for Scott and I want to kind of do something because we obviously worked with Chicken and it was in my McKellen doc. I was like, I want to do something with Scott again and trying to find something that was a bit of a two-hander and sort of talking to a new writer and we came up with some really great ideas and one of them was this sort of yeah, something that felt so very much Jekyll and Hyde, and it wasn't named that, but I was like, but there's no reason why we can't make this a Jekyll and Hyde.
Yeah.
Um, and then we just kind of went off and spun off that and started to develop it further. And then amongst it all, it became, I was actually for a long time thinking, I felt like I was trying to make someone else's movie. It felt a little bit like I was trying to do something that sort of ticked other people's boxes, and I was kind of finding a way. And then getting frustrated with it, but feeling happy with the structure of it, but kind of going like, it's a very strange movie. It's not an outright horror. And it was like, how do I make this how do I find an interesting way in? And so then when it came to casting and we spoke to Eddie, it felt like suddenly, okay, well, this is interesting. Now I feel like we can lean into the camp. Now we can kind of do sort of this thing that's like just places it in a different thing. And it's basically Jekyll and Hyde as a story and as a character is has stood the test of time for good reason. And because it speaks to us about so many different things. And you can look into it in different ways and you can, touch on different subjects depending on how you want to represent things and what you want to do. And it was kind of like, okay, well, we don't have to stick to the book religiously. When you're adapting things, you normally are wanting to stick quite religiously to what the story is. But because it's been done so much, it was kind of like, well, we can kind of do what we want. We can go wherever we want with it, and we can also have the advantage of the audience thinking they know what's coming, thinking they know what it's going to be because then hopefully they can come in and go, so, film's called Dr. Jekyll. Everybody's waiting for Hyde. And if we're going like, well, actually, well, you don't know when Hyde's there. That's kind of interesting. So like, let's try and do something that's just a little bit different, a little bit unusual, and give it a different tone to perhaps other Jekyll and Hydes have had as well. So yeah, it was just it kind of just, I suppose, organically grew into what it is.
I mean, you mix so many of my favorite tones. You mentioned camp. I think Eddie, she naturally brings camp. That is just what, as a human, she brings to us. But you also got to play with horror, the drama a little bit. That's kind of all what I believe Hammer horror in Hammer Studios has always been about. Camp, horror, theatrical
Yeah.
lighting, over the top. Were you familiar with Hammer, the horror films, from the 50s? Or was this, actually in general, what is your history with horror?
My history of horror. I love movies of all types and all different genres. It's always about the story for me and the emotions that you go on. I always want to make some sort of connection in a different way, perhaps. I don't really go for films that are just trying to gross me out. That's not really my kind of thing. Um, the but with Hammer, what I knew that like I'm not so I'm not an addict. I haven't seen every single Hammer. Although I'm seeing more and more and more. But the sort of the Christopher Lee Draculas, obviously, and those sort of iconic ones, I was very familiar with. And funnily enough, when you watch those movies, they have a different pace and a different style and a different structure to all modern horrors, like really. And so when it came to kind of going, well, if we're doing that, I kind of want to play in that world, even though it might be deemed unfashionable, it might be slower than people are expecting it to be. I wanted to play in that world. I wanted to do this sort of slow build up, this character piece that then turns into carnage. Like that was kind of always the point and always the journey it was going on. I think that it's interesting seeing people seeing it and how some people are kind of going like, oh, I wanted there to be more horror. It's like, well, have you watched Prince of Darkness lately? Because like the first 45 minutes of that is just people wandering around a house going, did I hear something? It's that kind of like building atmosphere and spending time with characters to then do what they've come to see. And so I kind of wanted to play with that. It was that homage, it was that thing. And yeah, and so I knew enough of Hammer to know what to do with that and how that wants to play in that world. I would say that I know more, I've seen more Hammer films since doing Dr. Jekyll. Um, and I love horror, I love emotion, I love feeling something. That's the biggest thing with movies is that I want to feel something. If I haven't felt anything, doesn't matter how good the craft of the film is, I feel empty. So I want to feel something, and whatever that emotion is, I'm good for it. So yeah,
I mean,
that's it.
Dr. Jekyll follows the rules, I think, of a good horror film, where I have to care about who is happening and what's happening. We watch the Scream movies because we care about what happens to Sydney. You know what I mean? This is a character we like. Same thing with
Yeah,
this. You build up this time, and I think you nailed it perfectly because by the time, as you said, the carnage starts, I'm like, I care about people. You could have killed people off the first 10 minutes and you would have been like, cool, who are these
yeah.
people? So you
Oh,
nailed that
yeah.
exactly right. Now, you talked about working with Scott. Tell me about what's up with you and Scott, this collaboration, this bond. Is it easy to work with someone that you feel kind of speaks your same cinematic language?
Yeah, I think it's not necessarily it's cinematic language. It's an emotional language, and so I know that basically I can give him the feeling and the what what I want to see, and more importantly what I want the audience to feel, and he has just this very natural ability to kind of tap into that. And so we've done very different types of things together, and I think that and we'll continue to do different types of movies together because uh, he trusts me and I trust him. It's as simple as that, and I think it's. Yeah, it's just a friendship that we knew we were friends before we did Chicken, and we knew we developed that character a lot together even when he was doing the play before the film. And since we kind of developed that kind of way of working, we now have a shortcut that is just really nice. And I just think he's incredibly skilled. I think and he always brings something different. He always brings something unexpected and wants to play. And that's really good fun for me because, you could always do a very particular, easy kind of route with the character of Rob, for example.
Mhm.
But Scott brings kind of like an innocence and a vulnerability that you perhaps wouldn't have read off the page. You would have gone like, oh, he's been caught up in some bad shit in the past, and he's, this, that, the other. You'd expect probably a different type of character. And Scott makes these choices that I love. Like, and it's just like, I think it gets the audience on side with anybody that he plays very, very easy and very quickly, which is really what I wanted. I wanted people to be kind of like, oh, this is a modern boy. This isn't like a old kind of classic movie kind of trope. This is actually now a modern boy from 2023, 2024, and he feels like he's a modern boy in that old world, which is what I wanted. And Scott knew exactly how to do that. So yeah, no, we'll just always keep working together. I'll always find something for him to do in something whatever I'm
Well,
doing.
I mean, looking at Chicken to looking at, Dr. Jeff, I'm like, who is Scott? Like, I don't know who this actor is, and I like that because so many actors are like, oh, they're going to be playing this
Yeah.
role today, and I mean, he's so transformative. And speaking of a transformative, human, Eddie Izzard, please talk to me about working with her. What was it like? What was it like on set? Was this a person who came into set being like, I know what I want and do it, or was there some fun collaborations between you two as creators?
Yeah, no, we absolutely collaborated, and she's so look. I mean, it's a low budget film, and it was we were shooting so much in that house, and we all kind of lived in the house, and they'd converted the stables to also accommodation. So, like the crew, most of the crew and all the cast and stuff were all living in this house, and it was just fantastic. And so I really got involved, like would stay at the weekend as well and have like kind of drinks, and we became a little bit of a family. It was a very stressful set. We were being very ambitious with the amount of money that we had. um it's I mean, you always want more money when you make a movie, but this one in particular was like, oh, I'm really pushing what we can do with this schedule. But but Eddie's just such a great sort of team player, and honestly, it's just always a joy. And we would, Eddie would like to kind of go off and do few things. It's always like the way I work on everything, and it was the same with Chicken, was like, let's get what's on the page and then have fun. And if we can build that into the schedule, let's try and do that. And Eddie, she knows how to have fun, and we'll go off on trips and kind of have suggestions and go for it. And we'd not always tell Scott, so Scott would have to kind of bounce off that and see what happens. And there's a lot of that stuff in there. It's yeah, it was fantastic. I love her.
Oh,
She's wonderful and so inspiring and politically and just in every way. And you know, actually, I got her in on the film I've just shot as well because I like to have like a company of actors, a company of people that I go to, who I get on with, who trust me. And Eddie, I hope, yeah, will continue to being part of that company as well.
I mean, I remember watching Eddie's stand-up specials growing up and just being like, who is this character? It's such a fun thing. Also, the AD in me heard you say, let's get everything on the paper first. And I was just like, oh, thank God. Oh, I was just like, please, we have to shoot what's here. Like I that mentality slipped in there. No, I love what you did, and I love, like you said, you pushed the boundaries of a low budget production. So my last question for you really is, what else is next for you? Is there another queer LGBT adaptation of an iconic story? Like, are we gonna get a gayer Frankenstein, please, somehow, some way?
Well, I mean, I can't really talk about some of the things that are coming up. I've literally just shot a film on the Beatles manager Brian Epstein, and so that is out later this year, and that's lovely. That was again a very stressful project, but it was a different type of movie entirely. Um, I like to do things something different every time, which I think probably is difficult for people on the outside in the industry at least to kind of pinpoint exactly what I'm about. I think there's probably a through line in my work so far, whether it's Chicken, McKellen, or Dr. Jekyll, and then obviously Midas Man, like I say, the Brian Epstein movie. There's probably a thread that I'm not in control of that just comes out of me. But yeah, there's a couple of different things that I'm working on, and yeah, that yeah, I can't really tell you much about them, but yeah, I'm interested to play in a different field. I think because Dr. Jekyll really was supposed to, like I say, is this sort of camp weird, sort of like culty kind of thing. I am intrigued now, having dipped my toe in, to actually go into something that is deliberately scary, a horror, an outright horror. And so there's a couple of things like that that I'm kind of looking at. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see.
What a great answer that had nothing of details that I could clickbait headline there. So great, good on you. The PR
Thanks.
campaigning has been great. No, thank you so much for speaking with me. I really think Dr. Jekyll is going to be one of those films that live on where we're like, wow, Eddie at a different level. And then, when Scott becomes this huge actor one day, we can all be like, look, these were the
Yeah.
projects. And you, Joe, I think you're such a talented filmmaker. So thank you so much for speaking with me today. And I had a blast diving into some of this with you.